Hello, this is another exciting adventure of CIS 2555. This week we cover Chapter 12 and 13 for CIS 2555. Chapter 12 is an introduction to database program. Chapter 13 goes into how to actually create and work with SQL data sources. So I won't go through the slide deck on Chapter 13, but we will do the example at the end. So Chapter 13 is mostly hands-on. Um, so one thing you need to know when we start dealing with database technology, if you're not familiar with the terminology, you should become familiar with it. You've got the different items in a database. Database is actually made up of one or more tables, really. And in these tables, you have rows, okay, which go left and right. They are often called records in some terminology. And then you've got columns, which are often called fields. Okay, so you've got fields, and then the rows are the records. And fields are just basically chunks of information about a particular entity, whereas the rows themselves are one individual entity. So, for example, if this is a product table, then you would have the product ID and name and short description. This all has to do with the one product. So, and then you get the price and all the other information. So, there's a special key or keys that you have in a database or in a particular table, and the key that uniquely identifies a particular record or row in this table is called the primary key. Okay, so in this case, if this is the product table, the primary key product ID uniquely identifies an item in this table. The relational database system is the system that is most popular. It uses tables to store and manipulate data. Then you have the records called rows and the fields called, or the rows called records and the columns called fields. Most tables contain a primary key. You can have a primary key that could consist of more than one field, in which case if you had the primary key consist of more than one field, then we call that a composite key. So this right here shows relationship between two different tables. You've got what looks to be a category table over here, okay, with three fields in it, and then you've got the product table here. If you want to provide an association between two different tables, then we have to refer to one of the usually the primary key, but we refer to another field, a field in another table from this table. So I'm providing a linkage here. I'm saying, for example, the Freddy arm, if we zoom in just a little bit here, the Freddy arm right here has a category ID of props. And you'll notice that in the table for categories, then there's actually a prop category. So if you need any kind of information associated with the category, then you would use the foreign key. Okay, so the foreign key is not generated by a particular table. It's generated by the other table. It's not, in this case, generated by the product table. It's generated for usage from the category table. So category ID is a foreign key, which references the category ID in the other table over here. So, a little more information. Tables in a relational database are related to each other through the common key columns. The foreign key usually corresponds to the primary key in a related table. Table with the foreign key is referred to as the foreign key table. And the table with the primary key is referred to as the primary key table. Relationships between the tables in a database correspond to the relationships between the entities they represent. For example, if we go back here, you've got the categories and you've got the products. So if I have flying bats and I see that that's a prop that is related to the props in this table. So if I need to look up more information about, well, what exactly is a prop, or the short name, long name for a prop, I shouldn't store it in the product table, because all that information doesn't have anything to do with the product itself. It has to do with a category. So if you have more than just one field to include for a particular aspect of an item, then a lot of times you'll break it up into a separate table. So especially if there's three or more, that's usually a good idea. And if it's just a specific entity, it doesn't make sense to have, a category defined in the product ID here, because then every time we had props listed, I would have to also put the short name and long name, and that doesn't really make sense because it applies to the category and not the products. Design view window for the products table. In Visual Studio, you can actually create tables. You would right click in Visual Studio and go to add new data source. But you'll notice in here, when you edit the values here, there's certain options. You can allow a particular value to be null or not. If you don't, you'll get an exception from the database. The primary key can't be null. In this case, you'll notice the product ID is set as the primary key for this particular table. Okay. So these are common SQL or SQL server data types: bit, char, varchar, text, etc., etc. We won't go into all of those. Just be aware there's different types. And here are the tables that make up the overall Halloween database. So invoices is definitely the central table in here. You'll notice that it is related to things like line items and customers. So a customer can have one or more invoices. Invoices have one or more line items. And the line item each line item can have one product, but you basically only have, since there's a linkage here, and there's the primary key of line items is for the purpose of associating the invoices table to the products table. You will only have one line item or one product line item per invoice. So an invoice can have more than one line item, but there will only be one product per line item. Okay, they show you different aspects of SQL or SQL. Select product ID, name, and unit price. That says I want to see these columns. I want to see product ID, name, and unit price. I want you to get it from the products table, and I only want those. I can add the condition right here, where category ID equals prop. So this is only going to show me the product ID, name, and unit price, where the category ID are props. Alright, and then they tell you about joins. So you can actually join two different tables. The most common type is called an inner join. The inner join is when you're just basically overlapping two different tables based on a column value. So if I had, for example, the foreign key or the category ID in the categories table, which is the primary key, only when it equals the category ID of the products table over here, I'm making an association. So it produces an inner join and actually creates essentially a temporary or a virtual table that has all of the information we want. So short name, product ID, name, and unit price, and it has all the items matched up. Okay, so far so good. They give you the syntax of the three most common SQL things that you'll be doing. You have insert, which inserts a new item or a new record or records into a table. You've got update, which will actually modify a current record in the table. And then you've got delete. Delete removes items from the table. They talk about views and queries. Views are just different ways. Views and queries allow you to see the tables in different light. So we won't go through that extensively, but you can check it out. To see what goes on here with ado.net, the basic objects are, you've got the .NET data provider here. The data provider could be a SQL data source or Oracle, which is actually deprecated now, but you've got all kinds of different data providers. You've got the actual database over here. You've got the data set over here. The data set is actually the in-memory copy of some aspect or some part of the database. The database is on disk. So you will note that the data adapter sits right here. This interacts and it basically manages the data flow between the data set and the database, so it keeps consistency as you request it. So data adapter sends a command through the connection to the database server, and then the database server sends information back to the data adapter through command as well, and then you update the data set or the database respectively. There's a problem that can occur with database, and obviously this isn't a thorough database course. There is a course for that. CIS 1200 is the intro to databases, but there is the concurrency problem, or the concurrency issue, where if two users are trying to access a database at the same time, or a particular table or particular record, you want to make sure that they're not, one of them doesn't just save the item and then the other, both of them read it, one saves it, the other saves it, and then say user 1 saves it later, it'll actually copy over user 2's changes. So that could be a problem, right? So that's called last in wins. That's a technique where if you have more than one user accessing the same item at the same time, then we know that the user that sends its changes in last will actually win. So anything that the other users did is gone. The type that Ado uses by default is called optimistic concurrency. So that one allows, it checks whether a row has been changed since it was retrieved, and if it has, the update or deletion will be refused, and you get actually a concurrency exception. So that's actually, in some ways, that's better. It sounds bad, because you're generating an exception, but it's really bad if you're modifying the database and you've got multiple people trying to access it at the same time, and change it, and there's inconsistent data all over the place and different changes didn't get in. So usually to reduce the concurrency problems, there will only be a lock on individual records rather than entire tables, and then it's less likely there will be a collision between two users trying to change, modify, and read the data. Okay, so they go through some of the information here. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually make use of some of the things they talk about in Chapter 13 explicitly. We'll bind some data sources. I will expect you to read through and understand the Chapter 13 material, or otherwise look it up. If you don't have the C# version of the book, obviously the Visual Basic book should have a chapter on how to connect to SQL data sources as well. So shouldn't have a problem with that. There's also extensive information on MSDN as well, and that tends to be pretty solid. But you'll see a lot from what we do here as well. So what we're going to do is, I already have open this EX13 invoice line items application. It is uploaded as a zip file. You can extract it, and then I set this to use IIS as usual. I've got the default page here, and it's pretty simple right now. It just has the Halloween Superstore and then like a complete empty form right here. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go to the toolbox, and it says that they want us to add a label. So I'm going to add a label. Actually, let me go back here. Yeah, I got the label right here, right? And then what they say, a non-breaking space, so that's just a space. And then they want to put a drop-down list. So we're going to double-click drop-down list. Got the drop-down list. When you see the drop-down list, you'll see a smart tag that's displayed on the list. You're going to choose the data source. So this actually tells us, or we tell it, hey, I want this connection to the database, this in-memory copy of some of the data in the database. So you're going to do choose a data source. There's no data source currently, so I'm going to go to New Data Source. And then you're going to click a database, okay, SQL database. You could use other options as well, obviously. XML file, link, object. It'll say SQL data source. You could rename it if you prefer, but I'm just going to leave that. Hit OK. Which data connection? Well, there's not one that I like just yet, so I'm going to click New Connection. Go to SQL Server Database File and click Continue. It'll allow me to add a connection. I'm going to browse. And here, let me see here. Alright, I'm going to burrow on down into app data. That's where we have Halloween.mdf. Hit OK. Give a couple seconds here. And we've got Halloween connection string right there. If we look at the string, you'll see that it is connecting to the Halloween MDF file. Going to hit next. We can save this string. This is the way to save it to the web.config file. That will ensure that you can refer to it later. Alright. The data source will include just the invoice number, because we're actually going to use two data sources here. The first one's going to be a drop-down list. The second one's going to actually be a list of information coming from the database. So it's going to say specify column. I'm going to change this drop-down to invoices, and I'm just going to check invoice number. Now it says they want invoice numbers where the total is greater than 300. Okay, so in an SQL statement, SQL statement, we would use a where clause. So you can actually use the visual interface to generate that. You'll notice it's actually creating the SQL down here. I'm going to click where. I'm going to select the column. Well, they want the total to be greater than, and there's no particular source except for the table, so we're just going to click none, and it will allow us to type in a specific value. So I'm going to put 300. Then I'm going to click add at the bottom. So you'll notice that's the condition right here. It takes the total and compares it to the parameter total, which is 300. I hit OK. So then I'm going to hit next. I could test the query right now. If I do it, hit OK, I should get some information, which I do. So 1026, 27, etc. Hit finish. That's the clause there. Make sure that we've got the invoice number set as the data field for both of those. Hit OK. Right, so that's data bound. We're going to change the name of this drop-down list now. I'm going to go over here to the properties, and I'm going to change it to DDL invoice. DDL invoice, and configure the data source so it uses the connection string that's in the web config file. So I'm going to just make sure that if I have choose data source, it's set to SQL data source 1, invoice number. That's good. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, also for this one I have to make sure the auto post back is set to true. Alright, right there. So that data bound sources auto postbacks set to true. So I'm going to hit enter underneath this SQL data source. I'm going to go under the data in the tool box over here. I'm going to add another data source. I'm just going to double click it. It'll create a new data source with the default name SQL data source 2. I'm fine with that. I'm going to click configure data source, and they want us to configure this one using the same connection string. I guess we could use either of these. They really actually point to the same thing, so it doesn't really matter. But okay, so you've got a Halloween connection string. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to specify it says from the line items table that they want the product ID, unit price, quantity, and extension. So product ID, unit price, quantity, extension. It's everything but the invoice number. However, they want it to select only the line items for the invoice that's selected from the drop-down list that we just added. So they want to show the line items in here, but they want it to match only what we have from the drop-down list. So I'm going to go to where. I'm going to change it to where invoice number equals, and what source? We're looking at a control. So what control is it? It's that data drop-down list right here, the data source there. So it's going to go off of that. So the selected value right here is what it's going to use. I'm going to hit OK there and hit Next and Finish. So that's more dynamic, so testing the query probably won't give you much. So this actually, I'm going to change the label. I forgot to change the label to Choose an Invoice as the text. So I'm going to do that right now. Choose an invoice. There we go. Okay, so you've got the SQL data source 2. Once we have that set, I'm going to add a data list control to the form. I'm going to put it right under the first data source. Data list, right, there's our data list. I'm going to choose the data source as SQL data source 2, and it starts showing a bunch of information here. I'm going to also change its name to DL line items, DL line items, because it's a data list, not DDL. If I run this without debugging, if you get a warning, just say without debugging. If I run this, you'll notice that I can actually change the invoice, and it will actually change the product information that's displayed. However, this isn't a real pretty way of displaying the information, so we're going to fix that next. So the next thing we're going to do is, next to the data list, I'm going to display the smart tag and go to Edit Template. So the template has to do with how is it viewed. The item template is, not surprising, how the items are shown in this particular data list. So once I do that, we're going to delete the literal text from each column. So right here, I'm going to delete the literal text here. Okay. And for unit price, the stuff in the brackets is actually the fields, so we don't want to touch those. Those actually are going to be replaced with the actual data from the database. So we've seen some of this. This particular stuff we haven't seen because we haven't dealt with it yet, but you have seen the SQL data sources in action since the beginning because our entire project has dealt with them. I'm going to hit Enter a couple times just to give me some space. And I'm going to add a table. They say that they want us to add a table to the bottom of the template. So I'm going to go to Table, Insert Table. They want it to be 1 row and 4 columns. And they want to make sure you set it to pixels and pixels. 400 as the width. And then I'm going to hit, again, it's rows 1, columns 4. 400 width. Make sure everything's right. Hit OK. And it creates this little table down here. And they said that they would like the width of each column to be 100 pixels and then right align the second, third, and fourth columns. And then they give you a little hint that says to do that you can create styles. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually create a left style and a right style for these three. So the left style, if I click in this little cell here, I can go over to the properties and then go down to Apply Styles, which is right down here. If I do that, I can click New Style. The very first thing you want to do, just so you don't forget, is change the name, and then you're going to say, I'll say cell left for this one, and then check. This is very important that you check Apply New Style to Document Selection. All right, so I'm going to go to Position, and I change the position. It says they want them to each be 100 pixels, and since left is the default, I don't have to change the alignment to left. It's automatic. So I hit OK there, and this cell, TD, has cell left applied to it. Now, these three, I'm going to create a new one by clicking over in this one, the second one over. I'm going to go to New Style. It's going to be called Cell Right. I'm going to check it, Apply New Style. I'm going to go to Position, and I'm going to actually change the width to 100, but also under block, I have to change the text align to right because these are different. Right is not the default. So I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm going to click in the next cell over, and I'm just going to apply the cell right style and do the same thing to this one. Notice it says TD, and then when I click cell right, it changes it to cell right. So cell left, cell right, cell right, cell right. I'm going to grab each of these fields and plop them into the cells. Right? Okay, and then I'm going to delete some of this extra space that we seem to have created. All right. Okay. So you've got product label, unit price, quantity label, and extension label. Select the label for unit price, and you notice another smart tag pops out. So I click that and go to Edit Data Bindings. They want that to be formatted as currency, so I'm going to do that. Format as currency, hit OK. And do the same thing to the extension. I'm going to change that, edit it, and change the format to currency, and hit OK. All right, so we got those two set to currency. The others are just default. Then we're going to use the drop-down list in the smart tag for the data list. So that's this overall thing. To display the header template. So I'm going to go down here. It's no longer item template. I want to change it to header template. That will actually empty it out for you. You want to kind of do the same thing. You're adding a table like the one before. Insert table. Okay. Yeah, insert table. It's going to be a 1-4 column. It's going to be 400 pixels again. Same exact specifications. Hit OK. I'm going to type product, unit price, quantity, and extension. All right. So that's exactly what we want. Well, this time, I'm then going to also go through each of these and go cell left, cell right, and cell right. Okay, perfect. When we're done with that, we can just exit out of the template editing mode. So I'm just going to click the little tag here and go to End Template Editing. All right, it gives us default values here just to show you. And once I've done that, then I'm going to actually click the little arrow for the data list and then click the Auto Format command. Now this allows us to put a nice pretty format. So you can go to a bunch of these different ones and see what looks nice to you, but we're going to select simple. Simple is the one. Snowy Pine's kind of cool too, but we're going to do simple. So I'm going to hit OK, and you'll notice it will show the headers and it will show all the different information with kind of an alternating color here, and that's actually really, really pretty. So I'm now going to run the application and see if it looks good to us and if it works properly. Okay, and it does. So if I click these little values here, you'll notice it will actually change them, change the data that's actually displayed here. So I could put an extra space between these two. I'm not really going to bother with that right now because this isn't production quality, but I'm going to show you, I just show you that every time we go to each of these, it takes it to a different set of data, and it's dynamic. So that's pretty much it for what you need this week as well. So you have a good week, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.